socks. Purification ritual, wiping over barriers during ablution. Barriers, socks, and shoes. Conditions of wiping over barriers. 1. Purification. Wearing the barrier while being in the state of ritual purity. 2. Purification of the barrier itself. 2. The barrier must cover the ankles. 3. The barrier must be thick, impermeable to water. When to wipe. The beginning of the wiping period is considered to start at the time when the ablution is nullified. For a resident, 1 day and 1 night. For a traveler, 3 days along with their nights. Notes. In the condition where the barrier is removed from the feet, wiping is not allowed and it is obligatory to perform ablution. Wiping over barriers is allowed only when performing ablution. When performing ghusl, one must remove the barrier. Wiping over calves has specific conditions. Okay, so wiping over the barriers during ablution. What are the barriers that we can wipe over? Barriers in ablution are socks or shoes. So there are 2 things that we'll talk about. 1 being the conditions of wiping on the barriers, and 2 is when to wipe on the barriers. So in the condition of wiping on the barriers that every Muslim must be aware of, the person first has to be pure or in a state of purity before putting on the barrier. What does that mean? It means that the person has to have completed his ablution before wearing the barrier. The second is that the barrier itself must be pure. It can't have any form of impurity on it whatsoever. It has to be completely clean. Moving on to the next condition, being that the barrier must cover the ankles. So if it's a sock or a shoe, it cannot come under the ankle bone. It has to cover the ankle bone completely. And the third condition, that whatever the barrier of choice may be, it has to be thick, meaning that water cannot be able to go through it. If the water can go through the barrier, then it's not permissible for use during ablution. Okay, the next part is titled when to wipe. When to wipe on the barriers. So in the case of a person that already had his ablution and then broke it or invalidated it, this is the point in which we use to indicate how long a person can stay with his ablution while wearing the barrier. So, for example, if someone performed his ablution with the barrier on and prayed the Dhuhr prayer, then right before Asr prayer, he broke his ablution. Here, he can perform his ablution without removing the barrier and can wipe over it. Now, how long will that last? So if he's an occupant or a resident of a place, then from the Asr prayer time in which he broke his wudu and performed his ablution with the barrier on to the Asr prayer of the next day, for that duration of time, he can keep performing his ablution with the barrier on. But at Asr time of that day, he would have to remove the barrier completely and wash his feet during the ablution again. And just to clarify, the important thing here to focus on is that the time used to indicate how long the ablution with the barrier lasts starts from when the person first broke his wudu, not from when he made it. And that's an important part to know. Now, we just mentioned the duration of how long one can keep performing ablution with the barrier on for a resident. As for a traveler, the ablution would last a duration of 3 days. So from the time that he broke his wudu, then renewed it, his ablution would last for 3 whole days. Then he would be required to remove the barrier, perform it again by washing his feet during the ritual. Okay, moving on to the next page here. Here it talks about the conditions of the barrier if it's removed from the feet. So if for whatever reason the barrier was removed, then the ablution would no longer be valid. The person would have to remove the barrier completely and wash his feet again. Also, wiping is only allowed during ablution, nothing else. In the case of ghusl, it's not permissible. The person should have to remove the person would have to remove the barrier completely in order to perform ghusl. There's also a case in which a person or someone may be required to wear a cast. So wiping over cast has its own set of conditions. If someone were to need a cast on their body, then there are different rules about it that we'll not be talking about or learning today. And that concludes the end of today's lesson in wiping over the barriers during ablution. Jazakallah khairan.